Hey, Steve. Thanks for joining me on this little project, and we certainly appreciate all the work that you've done. Steve and I have worked together on our Nexus project for some time now. He gives me hardware requests, and I give him software requests. But this certainly would not be the project it is if it wasn't for his efforts and his contributions. So, Steve, introduce yourself and tell us what you've been up to.
Well, thanks, Bud. My name is Steve Magnuson, AG7GN, and I've been working with Bud for probably a year now, maybe even more than that, on the image that we use on the Nexus DR Export. Now, prior to that, I worked for Boeing as a network engineer and did a lot of work with Linux. So the transition to the Raspberry Pi and Linux in general in the ham radio world was sort of natural to me. And one thing I noticed with that, even though the Raspberry Pi had some pretty significant adoption in the ham radio community, there was still a bit of a learning curve for those, especially for those hams who really aren't interested in understanding operating systems. They just want to operate the Raspberry Pi ham application in order to operate their radios. So I saw a need there and developed an image based on the standard Raspbian image in which I overlaid a set of scripts that allow you to run a graphical user interface or a GUI, and you can configure various ham applications that way. You can operate them. You can update the ham applications or install them if they're not already installed in a way that's more familiar to those hams who are used to using, say, Windows or a Mac, rather than on the command line that you often find with Linux. So that was the genesis of my project. And I started this independent of the Nexus DR Export project that Bud was working on. And we worked in parallel without really knowing what the other was doing for quite some time. And eventually we crossed paths and discovered, well, there's a certain, quite a few synergies here, and decided to team up and make this project work in a variety of different applications for a lot of different hams.
Well, that's great. So you want to show us what you've got?
Sure. Let me share my screen here. Okay, so this is a Raspberry Pi that I'm operating here at home. This particular Nexus board is mounted on a Pi 4, although the board, of course, will work on a Pi 3 or a Pi 3B. The first thing you see is the background image, and this is the standard background image, although it doesn't come equipped with a call sign. So one of the simple scripts I added was the ability to change the name of your background image, to put your call sign or whatever you want in there. And that's under the Preferences menu under Edit Background Text. So you can put your call sign in there and then toggle this checkbox if you want to include the host name of your Pi or not on there. So that's how that works. The other thing I added was the ability to turn on auto hotspot. A lot of hams are using these Raspberry Pis in applications for MCOM use in Go kits, and they're often away from the internet and no other network connection. So in order to VNC into them, like I'm doing here, where I'm remotely controlling the Raspberry Pi with VNC Viewer, they would like to turn the Raspberry Pi into a Wi-Fi hotspot and connect to it that way. So I wrote a GUI around a script that is popular on the internet for the Raspberry Pi for this purpose. You can go in and set your SSID and the hotspot password, select what channel you want to operate, and it can automatically detect whether you're running a Pi 3, which only has a 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi, or the later models, the 3B or the 4, which has both a 2.4 and a 5 gigahertz password. But most of the scripting that I've done is found in the ham radio menu. And if you click on the Raspberry Pi in this ham Pi image, you can see several items in here. These are organized by left and right radios. As Bud has explained, you can see the Nexus DR Export supports 2 radios at the same time, and there's a left radio and a right radio. So I set up FL Digi, FL Message, FL Amp, and FL ARQ already configured to use the left radio or the right radio. Now in this case, I have the names of my radio programmed in here. Normally the left would appear up here and the right would appear down here. But there's another script I wrote called Name Your Radios, in which you can name the left radio and name the right radio. By default, they just say left radio and right radio. So that's kind of a convenience for those hams who want to know which radio is which. I also have some scripts that can control Direwolf. This first one is a one where you can configure the Direwolf TNC and monitor the output from Direwolf in a window here. So these tabs, this is the monitor window shown. There's a configure TNC window here where you can select which audio interface you want to use. And up here is some guidance on which one you should use for the left radio and right radio, push to talk, the AGW port, KISS port, and the rate of the sound card and which Direwolf modem to use. And then there's another tab for configuring PAT. For those of you who don't know, PAT is a WinLink client, and it is works pretty well. It provides a web interface as well as a command line interface, and it's designed to work with a TNC like Direwolf. So you can go in here and configure PAT to your liking and set up which ports it wants to listen to, and certain AX25 parameters are listed here as well that you can program. And then the output, when you click Restart Direwolf and PAT, it restarts Direwolf and PAT, and you can see the output here. And either connect to this with a Windows machine over the same network via WinLink to the Direwolf application, or you can open a web browser to your Pi and go to this URL and see the PAT web interface that provides a WinLink client. I also have a radio monitor here. This is an application that shows when the push-to-talk is activated on either the left or the right radio. So if you're running FL Digi or Direwolf or any other ham application that triggers to push-to-talk via the GPIO, these indicators turn red to show when you're transmitting or receiving. And there are also some controls here to start a radio receive audio monitor or the transmit audio monitor. You can send the audio output from the receive side or the transmit side to a set of speakers that are connected to your Raspberry Pi. The way that FL Digi and the other ham applications are set up in here, it's designed to use the Pulse Audio application. And Pulse Audio is an audio server that allows you to share the audio devices in a way that doesn't cause a conflict between the software packages. This application here is the first one I wrote. I think it is the first one I wrote. And this is to manage the installation and the updating of various Pi and the Raspberry Pi operating system and associated applications, as well as ham software. And if you run this application, it brings up a graphical user interface that lists all of the possible programs that I have enabled in a script that you can upgrade. So this is the first script, for example, is a script I wrote for rig control for the Kenwood 710 or the 71A. ARM is in there, auto hotspot I showed earlier, chirp for programming your radio, Direwolf, etc. And there's some other applications down here, some of which I manage also. The IP tables rules, RMS gateway software, some utilities, JS8 call, etc. So if they're already installed, it will show that here. You just check the box and you click OK, and it'll go out and see if there's any updates, and then you can, it will automatically install those updates for you if you want. If it's a new installation, it'll show up here as not installed yet. You check the box and it'll install that program. Some of these applications, it will also configure them at least minimally for you. Other applications, you'll have to configure them yourself. There's so much variety in these applications as far as how they're configured that it's difficult to script that part of it. All of the ham applications that are controlled via this update Pi and ham software menu item will appear in this menu here. So you can select any of these from the menu. You can also rearrange the items on this menu if you want to. The reason you see FL Digi and FL Message appear here by themselves instead of up here is that I've installed an alpha version of them down here that I'm experimenting with right now. Normally, a regular user typically wouldn't see this information down here. Okay, just to give you a demonstration of this updater application or this script that I wrote. The one thing I should mention too is that this updater application automatically updates itself whenever it's run. So it goes to my GitHub site and downloads the latest version. And it will prompt you if there's a new version to ask you to rerun the script again. So for example, if we look for, let's pick one of these that's already installed, HamPi utilities, for example, and we click OK. You get some feedback in this screen as to what it's doing. What it does is it does a Pi update, but not an upgrade. And it will go out and look for that particular application, check the version number. So in this case, the installed version is the same as the latest version. So both the HamPi utilities package is up to date and there's no need to update.
So Steve, this means I don't have to do this apt-get stuff every time I want to update something. I don't have to Google it because I can never remember what it is I'm supposed to do, and it is kind of frustrating. I can just go in here and check a box and click a button.
That's exactly right. You can check all installed by clicking this button here, and all of the installed packages will come back checked, and then you can click OK, and it will go out and see if there's any updates for those. Now, one thing I should mention, you will notice that this top line here has a strike through in it, Raspbian OS and apps. Normally that works. You can go out and grab the latest Raspbian and all of the other Raspberry Pi apps via this checkbox here. But I have this grayed out currently because back in January, the stable kernel that was released by the Raspbian organization contained a bug in it that broke the FeePi software that ran the FeePi card. In other words, it disabled audio on the FeePi card. So I discovered it, fortunately, before any of the other users of HamPi did. And so I sent out a note and updated my HamPi updater, and I disabled this temporarily until a new stable version can be released. And they have not released a new stable version with the fix in it yet. The FeePi folks were notified of the problem, and they contacted the kernel maintainers for Raspbian, and they came out with a fix, but they have not released the stable version with that fix yet. So for the time being, you cannot update the Raspbian operating system using my updater because I intentionally disabled it so it wouldn't break people's Nexus DR exports when they're using the FeePi card.
But Steve, we know there is a fix. I mean, they figured out what was wrong and figured out how to fix it, but it's not in a release that we can grab and use. Us garden variety hams and Linux users can't get at it yet.
That's correct. They have, it is available in kernels that you can download. I'll call them test kernels or bleeding edge kernels, if you will, that have all the new updates. Those are often released every few days. However, the stable kernel, which is what most users want to be on, does not have this fix in it yet. The fix was actually incorporated about 90 days or so ago. And I have tested it in those bleeding edge kernels on another Raspberry Pi, and I know the fix is in there. They just haven't been rolled into the stable kernel yet. And as soon as they have, then I'll issue a new version of my updater, and this strike through will disappear, and you'll be able to once again update the Raspbian OS.
Hey, that's great, Steve. So if somebody wants to put this on their board, if they want to put it on their computer, two questions. One is, where will they go to find it? And the other one is, will this work with boards other than our Nexus DRX?
Yeah, those are great questions. You can, the best place to download the image is to go to Bud's website on the web page where he has the Nexus DRX information. And there's a link on that page to my GitHub site. And that'll take you to a README document which you can, which has all the instructions on how to download the image, how to install it on an SD card, how to burn it to an SD card rather, and then put it in your Pi and boot it up.
And what about someone that's using a different sound card or a different way? Will your menus work on any other Linux implementations?
In most cases, no. And the reason for that is a lot of these graphical user interfaces that I've written specifically are looking for the FeePi audio card. And they are specifically expecting that the GPIO is going to be on pins 12 and 23 for the left and right radios respectively. So this very much is a Raspberry Pi image, although it's based on Raspbian and you can get all the standard Raspbian updates for it, is very much customized for the FeePi card and the Nexus DR Export.
Well, that's great to know, and I could certainly say that I have gone to your GitHub site and I have followed your directions and successfully installed this. Your directions are really clear, really easy to follow. There's not a lot of assumptions in there that, so quite often I'll go to a website and I'm trying to follow directions on installing something in Linux, and there'll be really, really clear instructions, and then there will be a line that says, and now save your settings. And then, and it doesn't tell me how to save my settings. And for example, maybe I'm in Awesome Mixer and I'm looking everywhere for a button to push something to save the settings. And I could spend a lot of time, I'm sorry to say hours, searching to find out that, oh, I have to open up another window and type another command to save my settings. And your instructions eliminate that. If a person is following Steve's instructions, just go step by step, follow them through there. If you already know a lot about Linux, you can skip over and breeze over some of the details that he provides. But if you're new to this, like so many of us are, Steve, you've just done a great job of making them clear for all of us.
Well, thanks very much, Bud. When I was first starting out on Linux, that was a very big frustration for me as well. And the documentation is very hit or miss. Some folks up there who write Linux applications write fantastic documentation, and other writers, other programmers, their documentation assumes a lot. They assume you know a lot about Linux, and they can skip over a lot of steps. So I've spent a lot of time making sure my documentation is as complete as possible for those hams who aren't interested in Linux. They just want to make it work.
Okay, Steve. Well, thank you very, very much for joining me here and giving us this arm-waving tour of the work that you've done. I'll make sure that everybody has a URL on the screen. It's wb7fhc.com. And if you go there, there's a whole column about the Nexus board, and you'll be able to find the instructions that Steve is talking about. Hey, 73 Steve, thank you so much.
Thanks much, Bud. 73s to you as well.